I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event, and I need to say that.
At first glance, it looked like another ceremonial adjustment inside the royal family, the kind of announcement that usually generates a few headlines before quietly fading from public attention. But royal observers quickly noticed something unusual. Behind the formal language and carefully managed appearances was a decision that seemed to answer a question Buckingham Palace had been avoiding for months. And once people began connecting the dots, an even larger mystery started to emerge. For years, discussions about the future of the monarchy have revolved around a familiar group of figures. King Charles III remained at the center of every conversation, while Prince William was widely viewed as the natural bridge to the next generation. Public attention often shifted toward Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose popularity continued to strengthen the institution's public image, while debates surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle frequently dominated international headlines. Yet throughout all of those discussions, one senior royal remained largely outside the spotlight despite quietly building one of the most remarkable records of service in modern royal history. That royal was Princess Anne. Now, according to reports and growing speculation among constitutional commentators, Charles has taken a step so significant that many believe it fundamentally changes how power is distributed inside the monarchy. The possibility of granting, and a role comparable to that of a royal regent has triggered an entirely new conversation about trust, succession, and the future stability of the crown. While official details continue to be examined, the implications alone have already sent shockwaves through royal circles. But why Anne? That question lies at the heart of the story. After all, if the monarchy were following the simplest path, many people would expect additional responsibilities to flow naturally toward the Prince of Wales. William is the heir to the throne. He represents the future. From the outside, it would seem logical that any expansion of constitutional authority would move in his direction. Yet that assumption begins to look far less straightforward once the realities facing the royal family are taken into account. Over the past several years, the institution has faced challenges unlike anything seen in generations. Health concerns involving senior members of the family have forced difficult conversations behind palace walls. Public expectations remain immense, while the demands placed upon working royals continue to grow. The crown must appear stable, consistent, and fully functional regardless of circumstances unfolding in private. That requirement creates a difficult problem. Who can be trusted to shoulder responsibility when events become unpredictable? The answer, many observers argue, has been visible for decades, long before anyone imagined discussions about regency powers or expanded constitutional responsibilities, and had already established a reputation unlike almost anyone else within the royal household. While others attracted media fascination, the Princess Royal became known for something far less glamorous but arguably far more valuable: reliability. Year after year, engagement after engagement, and built a record that few could match. She consistently ranked among the hardest-working members of the royal family, often carrying out hundreds of official duties annually without seeking attention or publicity. Unlike many public figures whose influence depends upon popularity, her authority was built upon consistency. And that distinction matters, because institutions facing uncertainty rarely look for the most famous person in the room. They look for the most dependable. What makes him particularly fascinating is that she never appeared interested in accumulating influence for its own sake. In fact, one of the defining features of her public life has been an almost complete absence of personal ambition regarding status. While public fascination frequently focused on titles, hierarchy, and succession, the Princess Royal developed a reputation for concentrating on duty itself rather than the rewards associated with it. Could that be exactly why Charles now trusts her so deeply? Many royal watchers believe so. The relationship between the king and his sister has always been shaped by a shared understanding of what royal service actually demands. Unlike younger generations who entered public life during the age of social media and nonstop news coverage, Anne and Charles were formed by decades of direct exposure to constitutional responsibilities under the guidance of their mother, Queen Elizabeth II. They witnessed crises together. They experienced political transitions together. They observed firsthand how the crown navigated moments of national uncertainty. That shared experience created something difficult to replicate, institutional memory. And institutional memory becomes incredibly valuable during periods of change. What makes the current situation even more intriguing is the timing. Discussions surrounding its growing role are emerging at a moment when the monarchy is actively adapting to new realities. Public expectations have evolved. The media landscape has transformed. The pressures facing senior royals are vastly different from those experienced even 20 years ago. In such an environment, every appointment sends a message. Every gesture carries meaning. Every decision invites interpretation. So if Charles truly intends to place and closer to the center of constitutional authority than ever before, what exactly is he trying to communicate? Is this simply a practical response to immediate circumstances? Or is it part of a much larger plan designed to secure the monarchy's future during one of the most consequential transitions in modern royal history? That question becomes even more compelling when we examine the extraordinary groundwork that may have been laid years before Charles ever ascended the throne. Because the deeper researchers look into Anne's journey, the more it appears that this moment did not emerge suddenly at all. Instead, some believe it has been quietly taking shape for decades. And the next piece of that puzzle reveals a series of decisions made long before today's headlines. Decisions that may explain why Anne's rise to unprecedented influence was never as unexpected as it first appeared. What made the discussion even more remarkable was that it did not begin with a dramatic public announcement or an unexpected constitutional crisis. Instead, it emerged through a series of signals that, taken individually, might have seemed insignificant. Yet when viewed together, they appeared to tell a very different story, one suggesting that the monarchy may already be preparing for challenges that extend far beyond the immediate future. Royal commentators have often noted that the institution rarely communicates its most important intentions directly. Unlike governments that issue policy papers or corporations that release strategic plans, the royal family tends to reveal priorities through appointments, responsibilities, ceremonial roles, and carefully considered public appearances. In other words, the real message is often hidden beneath the visible event. That is why so many observers began paying attention to Anne's expanding position. The question was no longer whether she was trusted. The question was how much she was trusted, because there is a meaningful difference between being respected and being relied upon during a period of uncertainty. Many senior royals have earned public respect. Far fewer become indispensable to the institution itself. Increasingly, and appear to belong in that second category. What makes this particularly significant is the timing. The monarchy currently finds itself balancing two transitions simultaneously. One is obvious. The reign of King Charles III represents a new era following the extraordinary 70-year reign of Queen Elizabeth II. The other transition is less visible but potentially more important. It concerns the gradual movement of responsibility from one generation to the next. Ordinarily, those transitions would happen in a relatively predictable sequence. Yet recent developments have complicated that process considerably. The Prince of Wales remains the future king, but his responsibilities extend far beyond constitutional preparation. The future monarch is also a husband and father navigating intensely personal circumstances while maintaining public duties. At the same time, Catherine's recovery has naturally altered priorities within the Wales household. That reality creates an intriguing possibility. What if Anne's increasing influence is not simply about helping Charles today? What if it is also about protecting William's future? Several royal analysts have suggested that this may be one of the hidden dimensions of the story. By placing a highly experienced figure between the current reign and the next generation, the institution gains something invaluable: time. Time for Charles to focus on the demands of kingship while managing personal challenges. Time for William to prepare for eventual responsibilities without being overwhelmed prematurely. Time for Catherine to concentrate on her recovery without additional pressure being placed upon her family. Viewed through that lens, Anne's role begins to look less like a temporary adjustment and more like a strategic stabilizing force. Yet that interpretation immediately raises another question. If this arrangement benefits so many people within the institution, why does it feel so significant to royal watchers? The answer may lie in what it reveals about power itself. Most members of the public naturally focus on visibility. The people seen most often are frequently assumed to possess the greatest influence. However, constitutional monarchies do not always operate according to visibility. Some of the most important responsibilities take place entirely outside public view. That distinction has become increasingly relevant in discussions surrounding the Princess Royal. Reports suggest that Anne's value to the institution stems not from celebrity, but from credibility. She possesses something that cannot be manufactured through media strategy or public relations campaigns. Decades of accumulated trust across multiple generations of leadership. Trust from Queen Elizabeth II. Trust from Charles. Trust from William. And perhaps just as importantly, trust from those who work within the machinery of government itself. That last point is often overlooked, because constitutional continuity depends not only on royal popularity, but also on confidence between the crown and the institutions that interact with it. During periods of uncertainty, predictability becomes a form of strength. Anne's reputation for discipline and consistency may therefore carry significance far beyond public appearances. But another layer of the story soon emerged. If the monarchy is placing such extraordinary confidence in Anne, what does that suggest about the broader direction of the institution? For decades, the royal family faced criticism for appearing resistant to change. Yet recent years have presented a noticeably different approach. Health challenges that might once have remained entirely private were acknowledged publicly. Difficult realities were addressed more openly than previous generations would likely have considered possible. This shift has led some observers to argue that the monarchy is embracing a different model of leadership, one based less on projecting perfection and more on demonstrating resilience. If that interpretation is correct, Anne becomes an almost ideal symbol of the transition, not because she represents glamour, not because she dominates headlines, but because she embodies continuity. And continuity may be exactly what the institution believes it needs most. Still, there is a complication. Whenever one figure rises in influence, attention inevitably turns toward everyone else surrounding them. The discussion, therefore, began expanding beyond Anne herself and toward the wider balance of relationships within the royal family. How would such a development affect perceptions of Charles's leadership? What message might it send regarding the future king? Would the public interpret it as a practical decision or as evidence of deeper institutional concerns? Those questions became increasingly difficult to ignore. Some commentators even pointed to history for guidance. Throughout royal history, moments of transition have often revealed the individuals whom monarchs trusted most. Sometimes those people were heirs. Sometimes they were advisors. Occasionally, they were relatives whose importance only became fully visible when circumstances demanded it. That comparison has led many royal watchers to a striking conclusion. Perhaps Anne's growing prominence tells us less about Anne herself and more about how Charles views the future, because every monarch ultimately leaves behind clues regarding what they value most. Some emphasize modernization, others focus on tradition, some reward popularity, others prioritize reliability. If the king's recent decisions are interpreted correctly, they may reveal a preference that could shape the monarchy for years to come. Reliability over visibility, duty over attention, stability over spectacle. Yet even that may not be the most important implication. Because behind all these discussions sits a larger question that nobody inside Buckingham Palace appears eager to answer directly. If Anne is being positioned as a crucial safeguard during a period of transition, then what exactly does the institution believe lies ahead? The more analysts examine the pattern, the more they suspect the story is not simply about one appointment, one responsibility, or even one reign. It may be about preparations for a future chapter of the monarchy that has not fully revealed itself yet. And when the next series of developments began attracting attention, some observers started wondering whether the groundwork for that future had been quietly established years ago, long before most people realized what they were looking at. The more closely royal observers examined the situation, the more they began noticing a pattern that stretched far beyond a single decision. What initially appeared to be a practical adjustment was starting to resemble something much more deliberate, not a reaction to circumstances, but a continuation of a strategy that may have been developing quietly for years. One reason this interpretation gained traction is that institutions rarely place extraordinary trust in someone during a crisis unless that trust was established long before the crisis arrived. Confidence of that magnitude is usually earned gradually, tested repeatedly, and reinforced through countless interactions that never become public knowledge. By that standard, Anne's position begins to look less like a sudden elevation and more like the visible result of a process that has been unfolding behind the scenes for decades. That observation raises an interesting question. Was Charles creating a new role for his sister, or was he simply revealing a role she had already been performing informally? Some royal commentators have suggested the latter. They point out that throughout multiple periods of turbulence within the royal family, Anne consistently emerged as a stabilizing figure. Whether the challenge involved public criticism, institutional transition, or internal pressure, she often appeared to operate as a bridge between generations of the monarchy. That may help explain why her growing influence feels so natural to those closest to the institution while appearing surprising to much of the public. But there is another connection that deserves attention. When analysts discuss succession, most conversations focus on who eventually inherits the crown. Yet the history of monarchy suggests that succession is not merely about inheritance. It is about preparation. The most successful transitions rarely happen when a crown changes heads. They happen years earlier, when the structures supporting that transition are quietly strengthened. Viewed through that lens, Anne's emergence takes on a different meaning. Instead of asking what role she plays today, a more revealing question might be this: what role is she helping others prepare for tomorrow? That question inevitably leads back to William. Not because the Prince of Wales has been displaced, but because everything happening appears designed to ensure that he arrives at kingship under the strongest possible conditions. Several royal watchers have pointed out that the institution seems unusually focused on preserving stability around the future king. If that assessment is correct, then Anne's importance may be measured not only by what she is doing herself, but by what responsibilities she is preventing others from having to absorb. In other words, her influence may be creating space. Space for Charles to govern. Space for William to prepare. Space for Catherine to recover. Space for the institution to adapt. And once that possibility enters the discussion, the story begins looking less like a question of individual authority and more like a question of institutional architecture. Who supports whom? Who protects whom? Who absorbs pressure when challenges emerge? Those questions often reveal more than official titles ever can. Another detail has attracted increasing attention among historians of the monarchy. When royal institutions face periods of uncertainty, they frequently turn toward figures whose legitimacy comes from service rather than popularity. History offers multiple examples where highly respected family members became crucial stabilizing forces during transitions, even when they were not the direct heirs. The reason is surprisingly simple. Popularity can fluctuate, authority can be challenged, public opinion can shift, but a reputation built over decades is much harder to replace. And standing appears to fit that pattern remarkably well. What makes the comparison relevant now is that the monarchy itself is navigating a period unlike any seen during most of Queen Elizabeth II's reign. The institution is simultaneously confronting modernization pressures, changing public expectations, evolving media environments, and questions about its long-term identity. Those pressures do not disappear simply because ceremonies continue as normal. In fact, some analysts believe they increase the value of trusted figures who represent continuity, and that leads to another intriguing connection. Throughout modern royal history, the institution has often struggled to balance two competing priorities. One is the need to remain relevant to contemporary audiences. The other is the need to preserve traditions that give the monarchy its unique identity. Those goals occasionally pull in different directions. Yet, Anne seems to occupy a position where both priorities can coexist. She represents continuity without appearing resistant to change. She symbolizes tradition while maintaining credibility in a rapidly changing era. That combination may explain why her growing role resonates with so many different groups simultaneously. Still, a contradiction remains. If her value to the institution has been so widely recognized internally, why has public discussion of her influence remained relatively limited until now? Some observers believe the answer lies in the nature of Anne herself. Unlike figures whose prominence grows through visibility, her influence appears to have expanded through effectiveness. Visibility attracts attention. Effectiveness attracts responsibility. The two are not always the same thing. That distinction may be one of the most important pieces of the puzzle, because it suggests the monarchy could be operating according to priorities that differ significantly from public assumptions. While headlines often focus on personalities, the institution may be focusing on capability. If that is true, then Anne's position becomes evidence of a broader philosophy. A philosophy centered on function rather than image, reliability rather than celebrity, experience rather than attention. Yet even that interpretation may not reach the deepest layer of the story, because as commentators continued examining the pattern, another possibility emerged, one that carries potentially enormous implications for the future of the monarchy. What if this is not simply about supporting the current reign? What if it is about preserving public confidence during the eventual transition to the next one? The distinction matters. Preparing for today's challenges is one thing. Preparing for tomorrow's uncertainties is something entirely different. And according to several royal analysts, the decisions being made now appear increasingly consistent with long-term planning rather than short-term necessity. If that assessment is accurate, then Anne's role may represent only one part of a much larger framework designed to guide the monarchy through the years ahead. Which raises a fascinating possibility. Perhaps the real significance of Charles's decision has never been about transferring responsibility at all. Perhaps it is about revealing who he believes will be essential when the next chapter of royal history finally begins. And if that is the case, then one unresolved question becomes impossible to ignore. Because once attention shifts from today's institution to the monarchy that William will eventually inherit, an entirely new set of implications starts to emerge. Implications that could force many observers to rethink everything they thought this story was really about. As those patterns continued to emerge, the conversation surrounding Anne's role began shifting in a noticeable way. Earlier, the focus had been on what Charles might be doing. Now, attention was increasingly turning toward why the timing seemed so important. The distinction mattered because timing often reveals priorities, and priorities reveal concerns. What many observers found striking was that multiple pressures appeared to be converging at exactly the same moment. The monarchy was managing public expectations, navigating generational transition, adapting to modern realities, and preserving confidence in the institution's future. Any one of those challenges would be significant on its own. Together, they created a situation in which stability became more valuable than ever. That is where Anne's position started to take on a different meaning. Instead of viewing her influence as an isolated development, royal analysts increasingly interpreted it as part of a broader effort to strengthen the monarchy's foundations during a period of uncertainty. The key word was not succession. The key word was continuity. Continuity is often invisible when it works well. People rarely notice the structures holding an institution together until pressure begins testing them. Yet pressure has a way of revealing which individuals are carrying the greatest weight behind the scenes. And that realization led to another question. If Anne has become such an essential stabilizing figure, what happens when expectations surrounding her continue to grow? Because expectations have a tendency to create their own momentum. The more confidence people place in a particular individual, the more responsibility naturally follows. That dynamic can be seen throughout political institutions, corporations, and historical monarchies alike. Trust generates influence. Influence generates expectations. Expectations generate pressure. Several royal commentators have noted that this process now appears well underway. Public discussions that once focused almost exclusively on Charles and William increasingly include, and as a central figure in conversations about the monarchy's future resilience. That alone represents a significant shift in perception. Not because Anne is replacing anyone, but because her presence has become part of the broader equation. Yet perhaps the most revealing reactions have come from within the institution itself. Reports suggest that senior members of the royal family have shown little sign of resistance to Anne's growing prominence. On the contrary, observers have repeatedly pointed to subtle indications of support, cooperation, and confidence. That matters because institutions under strain often reveal internal divisions. In this case, many analysts have instead identified signs of alignment. Alignment around what, however, remains less clear. And that uncertainty may be one of the most fascinating aspects of the story, because whenever multiple influential figures appear to be moving in the same direction, the natural question becomes whether they are responding to present circumstances or preparing for future ones. Those are not the same thing. Responding to circumstances is reactive. Preparing for the future is strategic. The more closely commentators examine recent developments, the more strategic the situation appears. That perception has been reinforced by another factor that receives less public attention than headlines, but may be equally important. Institutions survive not simply because they solve today's problems. They survive because they anticipate tomorrow's challenges before those challenges become visible. Viewed through that lens, Charles's apparent confidence in and begins to look increasingly consequential, not because of what it says about the present, but because of what it may reveal about long-term planning. Some royal watchers have argued that the monarchy is effectively building layers of resilience around itself. If one figure faces increased responsibilities, another can provide support. If circumstances change unexpectedly, continuity remains intact. If public confidence is tested, trusted individuals are already positioned to reinforce stability. Whether or not that interpretation proves correct, it helps explain why discussions surrounding and have grown so much larger than the original development itself. The story is no longer simply about authority. It is about preparedness. And preparedness naturally raises questions about what leaders believe may lie ahead. That is where another intriguing consequence begins to emerge. The more and is associated with institutional stability, the more her reputation becomes intertwined with the future direction of the monarchy. Expectations no longer concern only what she can do. They concern what her presence symbolizes: reliability, experience, continuity, public trust. Those qualities have become increasingly valuable assets in an era where confidence in institutions can shift rapidly. But symbols can create challenges as well as advantages, because once a figure becomes closely associated with stability, every future decision involving that figure attracts greater scrutiny. Every responsibility appears more significant. Every public role invites interpretation. In other words, influence changes how events are perceived, and perception often shapes reality. This growing attention has produced an interesting contradiction, and has spent much of her life avoiding the spotlight, yet her importance to the institution may now be making that spotlight impossible to avoid. The very qualities that earn trust are bringing unprecedented attention. Some analysts believe this shift could have consequences extending far beyond the current reign. After all, William's eventual accession will represent one of the most significant transitions in modern royal history. Whenever that moment arrives, public confidence, institutional continuity, and experience guidance will all become critically important. The groundwork being established today could therefore shape events years from now. That possibility is what has caused many royal commentators to revisit everything discussed so far: the growing trust, the expanding responsibilities, the supportive reactions, the strategic timing, the emphasis on continuity. Individually, each element tells part of the story. Together, they suggest something larger, something increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. And yet there remains one piece of the puzzle that has not fully fallen into place. Because if Charles's decision is truly connected to long-term planning, if Anne's position reflects a broader institutional strategy, and if multiple generations of the royal family appear aligned behind that approach, then a final question becomes unavoidable. What exactly are they preparing for? Not today's challenges, not tomorrow's headlines, but the next defining chapter in the monarchy's evolution. The closer observers look, the more they suspect that the answer to that question could fundamentally reshape how this entire story is understood. And if that answer is beginning to emerge, then the developments still ahead may prove more revealing than anything we've examined so far. As the larger picture comes into focus, the most important realization may be that the story was never truly about a title at all. Titles matter inside the monarchy because they carry symbolism, tradition, and authority. Yet history often remembers moments not because of a title that was granted, but because of what the decision revealed about the institution making it. That is why royal observers have been paying such close attention. The deeper significance lies not in the possibility of and receiving expanded responsibilities, but in what that possibility says about how the monarchy sees itself moving forward. Throughout the story, one theme has appeared repeatedly, even when it was not being discussed directly: trust. Not public popularity, not media attention, not ceremonial prominence. Trust. When institutions face periods of uncertainty, they tend to reveal who they rely upon most. Sometimes that trust is displayed publicly. More often, it becomes visible through responsibility. The The people entrusted with the greatest responsibilities frequently tell us more about an institution's priorities than any official statement ever could. Viewed from that perspective, the significance of Anne's position becomes much clearer. The monarchy appears to be rewarding a lifetime of consistency. And that is a powerful message, because modern public life often rewards visibility. The royal institution, however, has historically survived by valuing something different. It places extraordinary importance on continuity, reliability, and service performed over decades rather than moments. In many ways, Anne's story embodies those principles. That may explain why so many royal commentators see this moment as representing something larger than an administrative decision. They see it as a reflection of how Charles intends to govern, not through dramatic reinvention, but through careful stewardship, not by abandoning tradition, but by adapting it to present realities. And that distinction matters enormously. The monarchy of the 21st century faces challenges unlike those confronted by previous generations. Public scrutiny is relentless. Information moves instantly. Expectations evolve rapidly. Every decision is examined from countless angles, often within minutes. Yet despite those changes, one requirement remains unchanged. The institution must continue functioning. It must continue providing stability. It must continue maintaining public confidence. Those obligations exist regardless of who occupies the throne. That is why some analysts believe the story ultimately reveals a broader shift in royal strategy. Rather than relying solely on hierarchy, the institution increasingly appears focused on capability. The emphasis seems to be moving toward identifying those most able to support continuity during periods of transition. If that interpretation is correct, then Anne's prominence is not simply a recognition of past service. It is an investment in future stability, and that future may arrive sooner than many people expect. Not because of any immediate constitutional change, but because every generation eventually faces the same challenge. It must prepare the next generation to lead while preserving confidence in the institution itself. That balancing act has shaped monarchies for centuries. What makes the current moment particularly fascinating is that multiple transitions appear to be overlapping. Charles is defining his reign. William is preparing for his future role. Catherine is gradually returning to public life. The institution is adapting to modern expectations. Public perceptions of the royal family continue evolving. Each development influences the others. Each creates new pressures. Each increases the importance of maintaining continuity. That interconnected reality may be the single most important lesson hidden beneath the headlines. Because when viewed individually, events can seem temporary. When viewed collectively, they begin to reveal direction. And the direction suggested by the story is remarkably clear. The monarchy appears to be building resilience. Resilience through trusted individuals. Resilience through shared responsibility. Resilience through long-term planning rather than short-term reaction. Whether one supports the institution or simply observes it with interest, that trend is difficult to ignore. Yet there is another reason this story resonates so strongly with many viewers, particularly those who have followed the royal family for decades. It speaks to the idea of legacy, not the legacy measured by headlines or public applause, but the quieter legacy built through service. Throughout her life, Anne has rarely been the most discussed member of the family. She has rarely occupied the center of public attention. Yet the qualities now attracting recognition were developed over an entire lifetime. That observation carries a lesson extending far beyond royal life. Institutions often depend most heavily on people whose contributions receive the least attention. The individuals who show up consistently. The individuals who accept responsibility without demanding recognition. The individuals who place duty ahead of visibility. Many royal watchers have argued that this is precisely why Anne commands such respect today. Not because she sought influence, but because influence followed reliability. And perhaps that is why this moment feels different. It feels less like a reward, and more like a confirmation. A confirmation of who the institution believes it can depend upon when circumstances become complicated. Still, even after everything we've explored, the broader future remains unwritten. Charles's reign continues to evolve. William's future role continues to take shape. The monarchy itself continues adapting to a changing world. What happens next will depend on decisions that have not yet been made and challenges that have not yet fully emerged. That uncertainty is not a weakness. In many ways, it is the essence of monarchy itself. Every generation inherits traditions, responsibilities, and expectations from the one before it. The challenge is deciding how those inheritances should be carried forward. Which brings us back to the deeper meaning of the story. The immediate situation may now be clearer than it was at the beginning. What once appeared to be a discussion about a single royal decision now looks more like a glimpse into the monarchy's long-term thinking. It reveals an institution focused on continuity, preparation, and trust during a period of significant transition. Whether Princess and ultimately becomes remembered as a pivotal figure in that transition remains for history to decide. But one thing is increasingly difficult to dismiss. The attention surrounding her role suggests that many observers believe they are witnessing more than a routine royal development. They believe they may be seeing an early indication of how the monarchy intends to navigate the future. And perhaps that is the question that will matter most in the years ahead. Was this simply an isolated moment within King Charles III's reign, or will history eventually view it as one of the first visible signs of a larger transformation taking place inside the monarchy itself? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the royal family, Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, King Charles III, Princess, and the future of the monarchy, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal analysis. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video.